Toto. I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Welcome to Async Book Club. My name is Steve.
I'm Marina.
And we're going to talk to you about Wizard of Oz today. And it's going to be part of a series with the book Wicked and then also the Broadway show Wicked.
So, The Wizard of Oz, as we know, is a classic by L. Frank Baum. It was first published in the 1900s specifically, and then, of course, as we know, was turned into the film in 1939. So we have our protagonist, Dorothy Gale. She lives in Kansas with her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, and then a cyclone comes, lifts up the house, takes Dorothy and her dog Toto, and then transports them to Oz. Something that's interesting and why this is kind of an American classic tale is that when Frank L. Baum was writing this book or thinking about writing this book, he lived in South Dakota. So the description of Kansas with the dry land is kind of representative of what he was experiencing at that time, because they were promising this plentiful land of the West, which was a myth, and which then caused him to move to Chicago with his family, which is kind of similar to Oz a little bit, because Chicago was being built up at the time. It was considered the white city.
Right. And I think the Chicago Fair didn't happen yet or something.
Yes. So the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, which is when he was moving. And people have drawn parallels between Oz and how it's all smoke and mirrors and Chicago, which was also kind of almost, not to say smoke and mirrors, but a lot of things were happening. A lot of construction was being done. And there was also a question of whether or not it was as wonderful of a city as, as it was supposed to be. So Dorothy lands in Oz, and the house falls on the Wicked Witch of the East, which she did not intend, but it kills the witch, freeing the Munchkins from her tyranny because she was a tyrant. And she is, of course, saddened by it. But then the Witch of the North shows up, which is different from the movie. So the Witch of the North is this little old woman, and she kisses Dorothy, which gives her this, I guess, shell of protection, so no one can hurt her. And she says, well, if you want to go home, go find the Wizard of Oz. He'll help you out. Follow the yellow brick road. And so she follows the yellow brick road, and on her way, she sees a scarecrow. And she comes up to the scarecrow, and she finds out the scarecrow talks. And he's stuck on that pole. He's only been alive for 2 days. He talks about how he was created. And he's very sad about the fact that he doesn't have a brain, because if he had a brain, he'd be able to do his job better. He wants to be a good scarecrow, but he's not scaring anyone away. And he feels like a brain is what he really needs in life. And he's kind of cute too. I don't know. I thought it was kind of adorable that when they set out on their journey, he can't even really walk well because he just doesn't look where he's walking, and he keeps stumbling over and picking him up. So he's kind of a little bit of klutz in the beginning.
I feel like they're all like kind of klutzy and cute in the beginning.
Oh yeah.
But we'll talk about that later. Yeah.
They get a little less cute. But yeah, as I go through, feel free to chime in with anything. So So they set out. She's like, sure, if Oz is gonna send me home, maybe he'll give you a brain. And then the Scarecrow's like, yay. So they start walking, and they come upon the Tin Man, who's stuck in a forest. The night before, they slept over his cabin actually, and they didn't know about it. But they show up in the forest, and they see the Tin Man, and he can talk, but he can't move. And he says, guys, give me the oil, and because my joints are rusted. So they're like, okay. So they oil him up, and he's able to move again. And then this is where the Tin Man gives his backstory. And the Tin Man says, I used to be a man. I was a guy named Nick Chopper. I fell in love with a girl, and the girl's mother didn't want me to be with this girl. So she went to the Wicked Witch of the East, who cursed an axe. And this is where the story gets violent, because this cursed axe would attack him. So he would try to chop down wood, but every time he would do it, the axe would slip and it would chop off one of his limbs. So he would go to this who was this guy?
A healer, like a
healer, or I think it was someone who was like in construction who would
worked with tin.
Who worked with tin, and a literal Tin Man. Who would then be like, all right, well, I'll build you a metal arm. And then, Nick goes chopping again, and he gets his other arm sliced off, and he gets another. So little by little, he gets his entire body replaced with tin. But the man, the Tin Man couldn't give him a heart. And I believe it was the witch who took it from him. And that made the Tin Man very sad because he was in love with this girl and now he was no longer able to love. So he really wants a heart. And he's like, maybe Oz can give me a heart. And Dorothy's like, yeah, of course. Why not? So this is where the Scarecrow and the Tin Man have a conversation because the Scarecrow's like, well, I want a brain because I think the brain is more important. And the Tin Man's like, well, what good's a brain if you don't have a heart? You know, happiness comes from the feeling, not from the brain. It's a really interesting argument where the Scarecrow says, well, if you don't have a brain, then you wouldn't know what to do with a heart. You wouldn't know how to function. So off they go. They keep adventuring, and then they get spooked in the forest by roars, and this lion comes out, and he tries to scare them, and they're like, WTF? And he's like, well, this is what I do. I scare people away, and I scare creatures away because I can't really fight because I'm super cowardly. They think he's being rude, but he's like, well, I want to be brave. So maybe I will get courage. And they're like, well, sure, buddy, come with us, and we're going to get all the things that we want or our lackings from the wizard. Then they do encounter a few adventures, which are all little small and cute. And along those journeys, they work together, they combine their powers, get through them. They make it to Oz. Once they get there, their guard there makes them put on these green spectacles. And he's like, you have to wear them throughout. And they're like, okay. They put them on. The land of Oz is beautiful. It's all stunning. They get in there
And it's all green somehow.
Everything is very green, which is shocking.
It was so shocking. Yeah.
Which plays back into the theme of smoke and mirrors, of course, and how Oz is a fake. So the man Oz, the wonderful, and they call him the terrible Oz, which I think is just mostly to say that he's, you know, very magical. He calls them in one by one, and first they have to wait a little bit to see him, but once he calls them in, he appears in different forms to all of them. So to Dorothy, he appears as a giant glowing head, and he tells her, all right, I'll send you to Kansas, but you have to kill the Wicked Witch of the East. And she's like, the West. She has to kill the Wicked Witch of the West. She's like, well, I don't know what to do. I can't do it. He's like, well, if you figure that out, you get your wish. Then the Tin Man comes in, and he comes in a different form. So he ends up being a scary monster for the Tin Man, like a weird creature. And he says, hey, you have to help Dorothy. And if you help Dorothy, then we're going to send you back. Then I'm going to give you a heart. He shows up for the Scarecrow as a very beautiful, lovely lady. And he tells the Scarecrow the same thing. And then for the lion, he is a great ball of fire. He also tells him, help Dorothy, I'll grant you your wish. And as we could tell, the wonderful wizard kind of messed up, I think, in his forms to these different individuals. He didn't quite match up with their fears.
Yeah, what do you think's up with that? You think it's just showing his
ineptitude?
Yeah,
Yeah, because I think that, well, how I would pair it is obviously the fire would be to the Scarecrow because the Scarecrow was afraid of fire because he would catch fire really easily. The Tin Man should have gotten the beautiful lady as a reminder of the fact that he's lacking of hearts and he can't love. Dorothy, the Great Big Head, I don't know. I mean, I guess that could have worked, but for the lion, it should have been the big scary monster.
Yeah, definitely mismatched.
But they set out on their journey, and on their journey, they hit more obstacles, and then they end up killing the witch. Long story short, but not until the witch manages to capture some of them. So there's a point where the Tin Man and the Scarecrow are scattered. The Scarecrow is ripped apart. All his straw has fallen out. The Tin Man is thrown down from a giant height by the flying monkeys. He's dented. He's broken. The lion and Dorothy are taken in as slaves. The lion is, gated. He's imprisoned, and Dorothy is forced to labor. When the witch tries to grab her slippers, the ruby slippers, silver slippers, actually, she grabs the silver slippers. That's when Dorothy, kind of unintentionally, but she gets ticked off and she throws a bucket of water on her, not realizing that would kill her, but it does. So they go back to Oz and they're like, hey man, we did it. We killed the witch. And that's when Toto, by accident, I think, rips down a corner of the room. And look at that. The wonderful man of Oz is just a hack, a con man. And he's like, I'm sorry, guys. I was just BSing this whole time while I was at here because I came here from Kansas and I don't know what I'm doing. And I've been afraid of the witches. I was afraid of the Witch of the East. And I thought, I need someone to kill my enemies, but I can't help you. They get really mad at him for that. But then he uses his con artistry again, and he creates these fake brain for the Scarecrow by putting pins and needles in him. And he's like, here's your brain. He creates a heart for the Tin Man by making this silk heart with sawdust in it for the line. He gives him a potion. And for Dorothy, he's like, sorry, girl, you're out of luck because I don't know what to tell you. And she's very sad, but she's still weirdly nice to Oz. I think that she was very polite to him, despite the fact that he screwed her over. But eventually,
it's part of her character, but it's also kind of not part of her character, as we'll talk about. Yeah.
So then he gets his stuff together, and he's like, "All right, I'm going to build a hot air balloon. We're going to get in. We're going to go home." They get in a hot air balloon. Toto runs out. So then Dorothy runs up to Toto, and then the hot air balloon flies off without them. But that really wasn't Oz's fault. So then they're stuck again, and then they realize they have to journey all the way to Glinda, the Good Witch, who is the Witch of the South, so that she can perhaps help Dorothy come back home. So then they have an entire slew of adventures all the way to Glinda. Once they make it to Glinda, Glinda's like, yo, you could just snap your little heels together and you'll be home. And she's like, yay! And she goes home.
Yeah, that was really good. And very different from the movie, which quite often is the case, especially from a darkness perspective.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the darkness of it? Because I thought maybe that's something that stuck out for me.
Well, it was really weird because in the very beginning, I have a quote. This is L. Frank Baum's introduction to the book. And he said, this book aspires to be a modernized fairy tale in which the wonderment and joy retained and the heartaches and nightmares are left out. And I remember I put a note that said ironic since Gregory McGuire puts it in Wicked, which we'll talk in a different episode. But then there's so many instances in the novel where it just kept them being so dark.
Yeah.
It's crazy how dark it got.
Not just violent. It's just so violent. There's one, I mean, just to go through some of them, it's just like a graphic description of how when the witch sends the wolves to attack the gang, the Tin Man is literally just hacking their heads off. And then there's literally a line that says that they woke up to a pile of dead carcasses in the morning. So, what? When they're attacked by crows. So that's when I think it was the Scarecrow's niche to really step into. So he's like, I got this. I'm a Scarecrow. So he literally twists their neck to kill them.
Oh, I think I found it. The wolves. He seized his axe, which he had made very sharp, and as the leader of the wolves came on, the Tin Woodman swung his arm and chopped the wolf's head from its body so that it immediately died. As soon as he could raise his axe, another wolf came, and he also fell under the sharp edge of the Tin Woodman's weapon. There were 40 wolves, and 40 times a wolf was killed, so that at last they all lay dead in a heap before the Woodman. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, so those are the moments that stood out the most for me. Like the story of Nick Chopper and how he lost his limbs, the murder of the wolves. I mean, there's been a lot of head chopping too. There's another Clawdog, or whatever you call them. There's this weird creature with parts of different animals that the Tin Man saves, or that protects the queen, the mouse queen. He also kills her very violently. Or not the mouse, but the weird creatures. Just very violent.
Very violent. There's another one with Scarecrow. The King Crow flew at the Scarecrow, who caught it by the head and twisted its neck until it died. And another crow flew at him, and the Scarecrow twisted its neck also. There were 40 crows, and 40 times the Scarecrow twisted a neck until all were laying dead beside him, which is like very similar to the previous. It's a very like biblical. It's like so dark. It's biblical. Another
Well,
one with the woodman. It's like Woodman raised his axe, and as the wildcat ran by, gave it a quick blow that cut the beast's head clean from its body, and it rolled over at his feet in two pieces. It's like, how is this not nightmares?
are you
How?
saying what makes it biblical? The level of graphic violence, or
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever
yeah, no,
read
the
Old
Bible is
Testament,
quite
but
graphic, yes.
it just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense with the beginning. Like, why would L. Frank Baum say this is like supposed to be like a little bit less scary?
My feeling is that it was just because it was 1900 that was not considered to be as terrible as it is today. As in, like, that was more accepted for children's books. You know, how fairy tales were also a lot more violent, and I think that we've sanitized things for kids a lot more. But that was pretty much just the way of the land back in the day. I mean, also considering, I guess, the environments that he lived in, where it was, the United States in the 1900s, where there were a lot of farms, and a lot of children were already exposed to, the normal slaughtering of animals for eating. So it was just the killing was kind of day to day.
Yeah, I just don't know how it could get darker. I
I mean,
guess
it
with like
could,
killing of kids, like kids running off into the woods and dying or getting eaten by a wolf.
but that's the most. I guess that's all the violence that we saw. I guess.
That's all the
I suppose.
violence, but I have bitchiness along the same lines. And surprisingly from Dorothy. I don't know if you caught that.
No, do tell.
There's not a lot of instances like overall Dorothy in the book, I would say is very similar to the movie. This like hero character that's like always nice and like no matter what happens. But there was like this at least one instance where Dorothy was like bitchy. And I'll read the line. The scarecrow says something. He says, if this road goes in, it must come out. And then he says, and as the Emerald City is at the other end of the road, we must go wherever it leads us, which is kind of like an obvious statement. But then Dorothy says, anyone would know that. Then the Scarecrow says, certainly, that is why I know it, blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't know why, if I read into it too much, but it seemed like out of character for her to say anyone would know that. It's almost like anyone would know that. Like, it seems
Was
like
this he got a brain or before brain?
uh, this is before.
So she does
But
seem quite
But it
sassy.
doesn't matter if it's before or after the brain. From hearing that, do you interpret something else?
Um,
Her saying anyone would know that. Can that be interpreted in a different way?
yeah, it's hard to interpret that in any other way.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I mean, especially for Dorothy. Like, if the Wicked Witch of the West said that, it'd almost be like, okay, it doesn't matter. But for Dorothy to say that was weird. And then I had another bitchy line with Nessa Rosa. She says, I thought I had beaten the Wicked Witch then, and I worked harder than ever. But I little knew how cruel my enemy could be. She thought of a new way to kill my love for the beautiful Munchkin maiden, and made my axe slip again. Oh, this is the Tin Woodman speaking. This is him speaking about Nessa Rosa. She thought of a new way to kill my love for the beautiful Munchkin maiden, and made my axe slip again, so that it cut right through my body, splitting me into two halves. Once more, the tinner came to my help and made me body of tin, fastening my tin arms and legs and head to it by means of joints, so that I could move around as well as ever. But alas, I had no heart, so that I lost all my love for the Munchkin girl, and did not care whether I married her or not. I suppose she's still living with the old woman waiting for me. So I don't know. It's even after reading Wicked, like, and knowing how she was like, still for some reason when I read this, I was like, it like further made me realize like, wow, like evil, like to do that.
Wicked Witch of the East, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that
the East Nessa Rosa. Yeah.
that element appeared in Wicked too, if you recall. It's a very short line in Wicked, but there's a
Yeah.
point where Elfie and Nessa are at a market, and Nessa kind of helps out a woman with an axe. She enchants an axe for her. So we see that origin story in Wicked.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. Like, even though like I remember that, and Nessarosa / Wicked Witch of the East had way horrible things that she did and said and whatever. I don't know. For some reason, it was still like it like re-implanted in myself. I was like, wow. It was such an unnecessary point as well. It was just to kind of like, yeah.
Well, I don't believe that the book is really the Wizard of Oz is really canon for Wicked, because he does change a lot of things. So no, speaking of the Tin Man, and something else that I think both of us noticed is the fact that all these characters already possess all the things that they lack. But the funny thing with the Tin Man is that, of course, we see a lot of emotion out of him through all the journeys that he goes through. But the thing that he wanted was to go back to his love, or to love his girl again. But the book ends with him becoming king of the Quadlings, but he like no regard for the girl that he wanted. So like that element of the plot is completely dropped, where it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm set now. So like it's funny how he doesn't go back to that plot line of like, that's what the Tin Man really wanted, to fall in love, to get that girl back, but it just, it just dies there.
It kind of tells you that the longing for something is a little bit not silly, but often you have it already. You have it within you. People long for things. People want things. I don't know. I think it's really like a good learning lesson, almost like a philosophical, like self-care lesson. Is a lot of the things that you want are within your reach, and you're capable of doing it, and you don't need magic for it. I have a really cool quote that has Tin Man and Scarecrow together talking, where it reveals what you just said, that they both already have a heart and a brain. It goes, during the rest of the day, there was no other adventure to mar the peace of their journey. Once, indeed, the Tin Woodman stepped upon a beetle that was crawling along the road and killed the poor little thing. This made the Tin Woodman very unhappy, for he was always careful not to hurt any living creature. And as he walked along, he wept several tears of sorrow and regret. These tears ran slowly down his face and over the hinges of his jaw, and there they rusted, which is like, obviously he has a heart already. Like, come on. So there's a few lines, but this one was like really strong in the book, where it's like you already have a heart. And then it goes, when Dorothy presently asked him a question, the Tin Woodman could not open his mouth, for his jaws were tightly rusted together. He became greatly frightened at this and made many motions to Dorothy to relieve him, but she could not understand. The Lion was also puzzled to know what was wrong, but the Scarecrow seized the oil can from Dorothy's basket and oiled the woman's jaws, so that after a few moments he could talk as well as before, which is Scarecrow showing his brains. And that was the cool thing about the novel, is the Scarecrow kept on being smarter and smarter and smarter and figuring all this shit out. And there was many moments with that. And it was cool. It was like
So what do you think about the Tin Man's decision to not go back to his girlfriend, which is what he really wanted?
I think he realized, I think he kind of either fell out of love, or kind of fell in love with something new, or maybe the woman or whatever girl was not even available anymore. I don't know, because we don't have an instant on that.
It continues probably in the books. I think it does continue in the books.
But right. There's so many books.
Yeah, because I think there's a sequel to what happens with him. But the thing is that like Frank, or L. Frank Baum, had no intention of writing another book. So I like the fact that he left that plot line just open, dangling, of not knowing what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't make everybody happy towards the end. It's too like cliche.
Well, I don't even know if it's about happiness, but yeah, just this very idea of, that the Tin Man had a heart all along, and maybe, I don't know. I like this idea of the fact that he thought that he wanted it because of this person, but he really just wanted to recognize it in himself. Yeah, that wasn't really about loving a specific person for him, but just knowing that he already has that ability in him. for the
Right.
the
Yeah.
general public.
Yeah. I think along the same lines, he was like in love with being in love with the person, but was actually not in love with the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again is changed. I guess we would have to read the other books for that. But yeah, so I really liked the Scarecrow, I think, the most because of what you said of he seemed to be not just smart, but kind of a genius. Like the things that he comes up with so quickly on his feet, like the way that it's described is like, wow, this dude is really just crushing it because I don't know. The one that I really liked is when they can't cross a ditch, and it's a very
Yep.
large ditch. And he's like, all right, well, the Tin Man, you knock down this tree, you chop it down, and we'll create a bridge. And it's like, you did this, you designed, like, you thought of this spur of the moment. Like, how do you?
He's like so. I got the same impression. It was just like whoa.
So quick on his feet. Yeah. And it happens a lot with him where it's just like, and very perceptive too. Like the prior quote that you mentioned about how he noticed the Tin Man had rusted. He recognized it right away. He has this perception of, okay, I get what's happening. This is what we need to do. Like very self-aware. So
Yeah.
I think it's no wonder that he became the leader of Oz at the end.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. I also have a quote with the lion getting brave without being brave, which didn't have that many instances like the Scarecrow, but there was one line on 538 where he says, "I think I could jump over it," said the cowardly lion after measuring the distance carefully in his mind. And it was kind of like subtle brave, but for him, just saying, "I think I could jump over," and like having that confidence was also kind of like you're almost like rooting for them because like in the beginning they're like cute and they have all these issues and complexes and problems, and as they're going on they're like doing all these different things.
So I wrote down the same thing, and I really liked that section because what I wrote is that the lion says when they're looking at the ditch, so he not only makes the decision to jump, which they do over the first one, which was much smaller, and he carried them on his back. And then I love that he says, "I'm terribly afraid of falling myself," said the lion, "but I suppose there's nothing to do but try it." And I think I've spoken to you about this before, but this idea, what the lion feels is his problem is the fact that he's afraid. So he feels that because he's afraid, he doesn't have courage. But courage is not the absence of fear, but the belief that there's something that's worth fighting for.
Right.
So courage, he already has it. He believes that the fear is what prevents him from being courageous, but it's not. The fact that he's afraid shows that he is just aware of himself. But it's the fact that he's willing to face that fear in the interest of something greater is what makes him courageous. So
Agreed. Agreed. And it's like it's almost like I said, like a self-help book in a way, like the learning lessons in terms of your heart, your mind, and your courage. Those are kind of like three big character traits that are pretty good to have, to be like kind of quick on your feet, to have a heart, and to have that courage. It's nice things to strive for, and the moral with those is like everybody has it. Everybody's capable of it. Were you thrown off by the silver shoe, red shoe thing?
no, so the change was made because the film, and I believe that The Wizard of Oz was the first Technicolor film. So
Uh,
the color was changed solely for the fact that red, ruby red, would look really great, in Technicolor.
uh,
Rather, silver wouldn't stand out as much.
got it. So
Uh,
in Wizard of Oz, yeah, they are talking about silver shoes and they keep on referring to silver shoes. They never do red shoes. In the movie, it's red. In Wicked, it is definitely red. I forget.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, they match the movie. Yeah.
McGuire, the one who wrote Wicked, I got the impression that he probably watched the movie first and then he went back to the books because the other thing that he adopted was the color of the skin of the witch. So the witch in the book, the Wicked Witch, is not green, but he adopted the movie version where the witch is green.
I kind of had a thought about the green thing. So the Emerald City, there were rows of emeralds set closely and glittering in the brightness of the sun. The window panes were of green glass. Even the sky above the city had a green tint, and the rays of the sun were green. And I kind of realized Elphaba is also green. So perhaps like green is like this negative symbol of like negativity and like envy, and because the Emerald City is green, Elphaba is green, at least in Wicked and the movie. So it seems like maybe Gregor Maguire made her green also, or actually maybe the movie made Elphaba green because of the Emerald City, but then maybe Gregor Maguire did the same thing.
So I looked into one of the questions for Wicked was about the representation of color, and green has a lot of positive connotations, and nature, growth, renewal, harmony, tranquility, peace, balance, calmness. In Christianity, green is symbolic of resurrection and immortality, optimism, hopefulness, responsibility, wealth, forgiveness, comfort, energy. So what I found that the green of the Emerald City seemed to represent is, and the fact that they had to wear these glasses, felt like it was a representation of what was happening at the time in 1900 in the US. So, like I said, he was in South Dakota at West during the drought, where everything was, and the drought was going on for 2 years. Everything was dead over there. And they were being promised this beautiful West land, which didn't really pay off. He moved up to Chicago, and when the book talks about, when Dorothy really starts out, going back to what I said of how she describes in the first chapter her home, of how the house is gray, the fields are gray, the sun has burned everything down, the trees are dead. And if we go to Oz and we see this Emerald City, so like green representing nature and growth, where it's like this mirage of things that are growing and happening as opposed to her land back home, but it's still at the end of the day a lie because they have to wear these glasses. And it's interesting because Frank Baum wrote a short story before he wrote The Wizard of Oz, and it was about this farmer during a drought who would put green tinted glasses on his horses, so that the horses would think that they're eating grass rather than wood chips that just look green to them.
Wow.
So I guess that's what really made me. So that kind of reminded me of what the Emerald City is, making it look green.
So I mean, for the Emerald City, it's a facade of growth and wealth.
Prosperity, yeah.
For Elphaba, I don't think the green is unintentional. So like the first green Elphaba, or we should say Wicked Witch of the West, is was that decision was made by the writer of the movie,
which I would have to double check, but I believe that was done also for the purpose of I think I saw a video on it talking about how that was also done to really heighten up the thematics of the film, because again, it was Technicolor, so it was such a big deal to make things as vibrant as possible.
Right. So okay, so I get it. So there's like the red slippers, and what's the opposite of red? Christmas colors, kind of like green Elphaba / Wicked Witch of the West.
They also considered, which I thought was interesting, of making in the movie, in the 1939 film, of making the Wicked Witch of the West hot. Like that was their original plan, like back because Snow White was big in when Snow White came out, the evil witch queen there is like attractive, and they're like, okay, let's go with this approach. But then they kind of changed it at the last minute to make her really scary and like
that fits better. I mean, the way it was done fits better. Because if she was hot, if the Wicked Witch of the West was hot, well, that would make her slightly attractive, right?
Correct.
Right. So you would almost not want her to be dead. So that'd be weird. You, I think, mentioned in the beginning the argument that Scarecrow and Tin Woodman had about brain versus heart. And I actually have the quote where they're arguing it. So the line goes, Scarecrow basically says, I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one. And then Tin Woodman says, I shall take the heart, for brains do not make one happy, and happiness is the best thing in the world. So I guess my question to you is, would you rather have a heart or a brain? Because L. Frank Baum is really making an interesting argument for both sides here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It depends on what you want. I guess it's just, I mean, obviously it's both the brain, right? The heart really has no function except for keeping you alive. It's not giving you any motion. So it's like
Well, this would be
symbolic
symbolic
heart,
art
because
versus
it's all in the
symbolic.
brain. But
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, if you just have a brain that you in no emotion, then you are in the psychopath territory, right? And I believe as a psychopath, you don't really we fear those people and we think that they may be quote unquote happy because they don't have to experience emotion. They can manipulate people very easily, but at the same time, I think they're very miserable because they experience in a weird way negative emotion. So going to a darker side of someone who has no brain, but who can feel.
I don't know if that's dark. I think it's actually kind of funny.
It's not, it's dark. No, no, no. If you think about a real example, because of the people around them, I mean, that person would be happier, certainly. I believe that the less smart you are, I think increases your happiness, perhaps.
Yeah.
Ignorance is bliss. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the heart part, maybe that's better. Maybe that's better. Maybe ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, I think I agree with that because like you can't live this is assuming this is kind of like making the argument, would you rather be like really smart with no emotion versus emotionally not even smart, but emotionally
Intelligent?
feeling and you're emotionally intelligent and you may not pick things up really quickly. And I feel like that person wins most of the time in life. You know, I know plenty of people that are very smart, but emotionally not so smart, including myself at certain points at my life. Not very smart, but not making the right decision emotionally. My first thought was the opposite. My first thought is I'd rather have a brain, and that way I could figure out how to have a heart with a brain. But
Smart?
I don't think that makes sense.
No, hey, I like the angle. I like how you think. You think like the scarecrow.
I think we had a little thing about the demonetization of silver.
Yes.
You,
So
I think you put that in, or maybe I put it in. But if
you
you want
you
to,
put that in, but
yeah,
it is something that has been widely discussed when this book comes up because, and it's a theory that came up years after the book was published, but it became a very accepted interpretation. So the book is meant to represent the 19th century populist movement in the United States. Um, and this started happening in 1964 when a teacher argued that the book represented, I guess, sort of the fight that was happening with the gold movement, that the silver shoes were representing silver, because during this period of time, farmers wanted to add silver to the gold standard to bring more cash flow into, I guess, into the flow of the economy. And I guess that was part of the spur of the populist movement. And so the articles that have been written a lot, and there are a lot of strong parallels. So I think that people have made really strong arguments showing how the book is representative of the populist movement. Although I don't know, I feel like it is still a post interpretation, even though there's such a parallel. But people feel very convinced that with all the themes in the book and all the symbols that it really does represent the populist movement.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk on that those symbols. So it suggested that the cyclone represents the economic and political upheaval. The yellow brick road represents the gold standard. The silver shoes Dorothy inherits from the Wicked Witch of the East represents the pro-silver movement, which is like this magical thing. You just go. When Dorothy is taken to the Emerald Palace before her audience with the wizard, she is led through 7 passages and up 3 flights of stairs. A subtle reference to the Coinage Act of 1873, which started the class conflict in America. So you're sounding like you're skeptical about it.
I do feel it was not intended by the author, but I do like the fact that this was created as a parallel. I think it's good. I mean, it was used, this book was used in schools as a way of teaching about this historical event in American history. So, I think that's great. I don't think I have a problem with it. I just think
It's
I,
just a
I do
coincidence.
not feel that it was intended by the author.
Yeah, at least like the exact symbolism.
There's other stuff that has been related from L. Frank Baum's life into the book, which I see the parallels, such as, his home life, that he kind of describes. The fact that this, I think, is considered to be something that I thought was interesting, that the Library of Congress called this book America's greatest and best loved homegrown fairy tale.
Like very
You know,
American.
it very American. Just all the symbols there are, even though we're transported into this magical land of Oz, we see these signs of just, you know, again, farmlands and a scarecrow and these standard things. Something else that I thought was interesting, I don't know if you noticed this too, is that like when they start off in Munchkin Land, Dorothy takes her time describing how everything seems so rich, as in terms of like everything's growing, everything's green, all the farmers seem to be happy, like there's tons of like crops and everything. And then the further and further they step out, they see more poverty. So like the things are growing less, and like the farmers are not as well off, which I thought was interesting. And I almost felt like, I don't know, that L. Frank was kind of pulling things from his life of just, you know, just showing the parallels to reality of what the US looked like.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that and just kind of thinking, showing inequality, unfairness, again, kind of shitting on the Emerald City.
Speaking of which, should we talk about the wonderful Oz? What did you
Yes,
think of him?
he is a deceptive person. He is someone that's caught in a bunch of lies and is used to manipulating other people. Kind of like he's like a malignant narcissist, especially towards the end with his constant manipulation and tricking, and he doesn't feel good about himself, and that was relayed in the movie and the book pretty well, and he represents not a very good type of character or moral code, that's for sure.
I like the fact that this character was in a children's book. I thought it was very it felt like it was a very adult element in a children's book, you know, the idea of someone who's a con artist, you know, in this kind of fairy tale story of like the villain. The Wicked Witch of the West is obviously just, you know, straight up villain. We only kind of see her towards the end, but here we have someone who's not a villain, but someone who we in our society would perceive, I guess, as a bad guy. He doesn't do things out of malicious intent. He does things out of self-preservation, but it's the kind of villain which I feel like is more subtle. It's this moral code that's being explored of like he doesn't do anything that's flat out terrible. I guess towards the end where he kind of pretends to give the scarecrow brain and the heart and everything, he's kind of doing it out of a good intent of like, oh, I just want to make them feel better kind of thing. Although he's also trying to cover his own ass by being like, well, I told them I would get it to them.
Right.
So,
The hot
but he
air
also
balloon
didn't.
thing was I interpreted it as kind of evil. It seemed like he did that on purpose when he got onto the hot air balloon and didn't, for Dorothy not to get onto it.
Well, but the way that the book described it really made it seem like it was an accident. Like the fact that the ropes were cut. I guess the way that the scene was told.
Yeah,
Like he
yeah.
didn't cut
I
the
don't
ropes.
know. When I was like almost like reading. I don't have the quote on it, but I that is definitely how it was like portrayed on the surface. But I don't know. For some reason, when I was reading it, I kind of read between the lines and saw like maybe a potential on purposeness with it.
I could no, I could totally see that. Knowing what we know of this character, because the character is not portrayed, it almost feels like the character is trying to be is being shown to us kind of through Dorothy's eyes, you know? And Dorothy treats him nicely, even though he's a total hack. And so, yeah, I think it's complete to your point, totally plausible that like reading between the lines, that last scene where it makes it seem like it was all an accident, but he was just like, no, I'm going to bounce from here. Screw them.
Yeah, or I was just like so pissed for Dorothy's sake at that point. Um, that I might have just been like that was the part that I was really most like pissed at the wizard. Like the other parts, it was kind of like he's like busy and trying to get stuff done, and all these people come along and whatever. And but that part, it was like I don't know. It bothered me a lot when he did
See,
that.
I was because that scene was written in a way that said that it was not him doing it, that it was just that the rope, because she jumped out when the ropes were already let go, because she bolted after Toto. So, it's still possible to read it as an accident because that's how it's described. But the part that I was pissed at the wizard was when they come back and they're like, we killed the witch, but then he kind of refused to see them for days. So like he had them hanging for days, and they're like, when are we gonna go see the wizard? And that's where I was just like, man, come on. Like,
I mean, he was thinking.
Yeah, he was trying to figure something out, but it's like that was where it's annoying, because it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for kids, I kind of agree with you that The Wizard of Oz is almost like the best character as a cautionary tale. Like, he's like the hidden villain that pretends to be good and we revere. So he's kind of like the politician or the CEO or the head of a place of worship that is revered and respected, but is doing some like shady stuff. I mean, it's a cautionary tale for adults as well, but it's a good lesson for kids early on to kind of like have their bullshit meter on. Because if you never come across stories like this, you kind of don't know how can you prepare for yourself for that.
Yeah. And it's kind of nice that it has multiple moral elements, right? Like the first one being that whatever you lack is already within you, which is a beautiful lesson. And then the other one is like, watch out for scam artists, which is another great moral lesson. And just sort of the journey that Dorothy goes through of change and kindness. Something else that I found is that the author Baum was also kind of inspired by Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, and he, which is why he decided to make his protagonist also a little girl, because he was inspired by Alice. But Lewis Carroll was known for the fact that he didn't want to have stories for children that were all morals. But he had this belief of that, sometimes stories are just meant to entertain kids, and we don't necessarily have to have a moral in it. But Baum kind of revolted against that point. So even though he wanted to sort of mimic the sort of fantastical way of Lewis Carroll, he still snuck in his morals, which is kind of more, I guess, the American way of lessons, which is how it was portrayed, or how he believed it.
Right.
Something that I didn't realize is how much The Wizard of Oz is beloved. Like, I knew it was liked, but I think only after reading this book and then reading into this book, I realized, no, this book was a very big deal. Like, it came out and right away, the author was pretty much just bamboozled by all these kids being like, please write another one, even though he didn't want to. And he did it, according to Wikipedia, he did it begrudgingly, and only because he was in a financial pickle at that point. So he's like, fuck it, I'll write another one. And then they kept making demands, so he kept writing them, even though he was like not prepared, because it was just so desired. And people, I've read comments of people saying that like they've had great grandparents where they said that their great grandmother would just like how kids were with Harry Potter, where they would see the next book coming out and like waiting for it because it was just so anticipated.
In regards to Wizard of Oz and Wicked, I would love to hear comments from people that are watching the video on what we were talking about, what they agreed on, but mostly I love disagreements if you disagree about it. And then also regarding Wicked, I want to know from people what they think about in terms of how we should do it, how long they would want it, or what they liked about what we did on this show or episode, so we could mimic it, and then what they didn't like so we could not do that. Then excited for Wicked. It's gonna be wicked.